Hello and welcome to Hamer Reviews. My name is Christopher Hamer and today we're going to be doing a bit of a comparison between the iPad Air 3rd generation and the iPad Air 4th generation. But to start off, I actually took my original iPad Air with me to the studio to record today because I thought it'd be interesting to look at how things have and haven't changed. The original iPad Air actually had a 9.7-inch screen and was a really good price to performance ratio. They weren't cheap. This was the 64GB version, which was the top end one at the time, with the cellular denoted by the black piece of plastic at the top. But it's a fantastic device, and even today it's completely usable, if a little on the slow side. Now, the iPad Air 3rd generation very much takes that original recipe and just upscales it a bit. So in this case, it's actually based on the iPad Pro 10.5-inch, so it's a 10.5-inch screen, though not all of the bells and whistles from the iPad Pro made it to this iPad Air 3rd generation. It has a mediocre 8-megapixel camera, it has a fairly decent set of speakers on the bottom, but the screen is really the star of the show. It looks great, works great, and is fantastic to watch and consume content on. It's also the first iPad Air to have the smart connector, so you can connect one of Apple's keyboards nice and easily without having to faff around with Bluetooth. And generally speaking, I think it's a really nice mix between price and performance. Now, the iPad Air 4th generation is once again based on an iPad Pro, specifically the 11-inch iPad Pro. And it is the exact same thickness as the original iPad Air 3rd generation. However, it feels very different because it no longer has the original iPad Air design. We've now gone to the boxy iPad Pro design, which is both a good and bad thing. Personally, I prefer the smooth edges. They're easier to hold for longer periods of time. But I guess we have to move with Apple's thoughts on what we should and shouldn't like. And this has a much sort of harsher, hard edge, but it does have a lot of cool new features. You have a much larger camera bump on the back. This actually has no camera bump. And you have a nice 12-megapixel camera, which is actually absolutely usable if you want to. Though I've always found it odd, people holding up iPads to take photos. The screen is, as I mentioned, an 11-inch screen, which is actually a different aspect ratio to the one on the iPad 3rd generation. But, you know, that's no bad thing. We don't have the smart connector on the side anymore. It's actually at the bottom of the device, right here. So on the back of the device, sorry. So it's a bit of a different layout. And one of the biggest changes for the iPad Air lineup, we no longer have a Lightning port. Now, Apple's Lightning port has become somewhat synonymous with the iPad line, but they've done away with it on the iPad Pros, and this one, based on the iPad Pro 11-inch, is no different. We now have USB-C. Now, I love USB-C. It allows for some great fast charging capabilities. It's becoming fairly ubiquitous, which is good. But if you're in Apple's ecosystem, Lightning is probably going to be the one you want, at least for the next few years. Apple's done a really good job of getting the sort of made for iPhone accessories and made for iPad accessories, and that just means there's loads and loads of Lightning accessories out there, and chances are, if you're watching this and you've owned an Apple product before, you probably already have some. So this will not be compatible with those accessories. It's one of those things, unfortunately. There is no choice in the matter. They've moved over to USB-C, and I think we're just going to be seeing more of that in the future. Another thing they've done away with on the iPad Air 4, which I think is a crying shame, is the headphone jack. Considering this is the same thickness as the 3rd generation model, it's an odd choice. I guess they've just decided that we no longer need headphone jacks. It's a bit of a shame, especially as, for me, my view on these two devices is that if you're a content creator at this point, I would go for the iPad Air 4th generation, simply based on the fact that this has some nice features which will probably make it better for you. Chief amongst those is Apple Pencil 2 support. Now, the iPad Air 3rd generation is compatible with the original Apple Pencil, but the new Apple Pencil 2 I think is a much more accomplished design. I think it's easier to use, and it has a really nifty charging feature where it sticks to the side of the device to charge rather than having to plug it in. I just think it's a much better concept, and as a result, if you're a content creator, for me, this would be the one. So, considering it has things like Apple Pencil, it has that sort of lovely screen from the iPad Pro 11-inch, why have they got rid of the aux jack on it. That headphone jack actually was also an input, allowed people to do some music stuff, which you can't do anymore. It's just one of those things. It's a shame. I think it's a thing that bugs me more than when they got rid of it on the iPhone, to be honest, because I think with an iPhone, not having a headphone jack isn't the end of the world, because I think we're all pretty much moving to Bluetooth headphones. But I think for those of you considering an iPad, it's probably not just a consumption device, it's also a creation device. And if you're creating, it's nice to have the ability to use those accessories that you used the aux jack, because it wasn't just audio, there were some other applications that also used it as well. It's a shame, but it's gone and there's nothing we can do about it. So if you need that headphone jack, you're gonna want to consider the iPad Air 3rd generation, because I suspect it's gonna be the last one that we see with a headphone jack. Of course, I'm saying you should consider it. It's obviously gonna be harder to find as it has been discontinued. It was replaced by the iPad Air 4th generation. I don't think that should be a major cause for concern. There's still lots of these about. And let's be honest, when this was new, this cost around £469. And the new iPad Air 4th generation costs £569 or so, around that ballpark. And you can get this one at quite a good discounts at the moment. So if I was looking for an iPad Air at the moment, if you want to save yourself some money, you can pay around £400 or even slightly less in some places for the iPad Air 3rd generation. I think this is a very good accomplished device for that kind of money. It must be said, there are some things that are a lot better on the iPad Air 4th generation. So you do have the lovely screen. You no longer have a home button, so it's very much got the design, as I said, from the iPad Pro and the iPhones. It's got rid of the home button, though it doesn't have Face ID, and that's reserved for the Pro lineup. That's purely a marketing decision, in my opinion. I don't genuinely think that Apple couldn't put it in here. They decided not to. But it does have a new version of Touch ID that we haven't seen before. Specifically, it has Touch ID on the power button. I don't know whether I like that more or less. It works very well. There's no issues, as you saw, unlocking it then, even without looking at the screen or anything. But it's just kind of odd having it in that spot on the top. I found if it's on the desk and I sort of try to unlock it, I need to put my hand against the bottom of the iPad. Whereas on this one, I can just put my finger on it and it will happily usually unlock if I didn't have the Touch ID disabled, because I need to put in my passcode first. But generally speaking, it does work very, very well. The screen does look better. It has rounded corners. Now, I don't know about how you feel about rounded corners, but I think on a device that's really nice big screen, it would have been nice to have a sharp edge like the iPad Air 3rd generation has, or at least less of these big rounded corners, because it does make it a bit of a shame if you're trying to watch content in full screen. You're just cutting off the edges on everything. Although the aspect ratio is slightly odd, so the chances of finding any original content that has this aspect ratio is admittedly unlikely. In terms of speed, so they're using different processors. In fact, the iPad Air 3rd generation is 2 processor generations behind the iPad Air 4. I don't think this is an issue. This device still feels very quick. So the iPad Air 3rd generation is still very fast, and unless you're doing very intensive tasks such as video editing, photo editing, drawing, that kind of thing, it's unlikely you're going to notice. If you're a hardcore iPad gamer, you probably are going to enjoy the extra horsepower in the iPad Air 4th generation. But it really is a relatively small thing in terms of noticing it in day-to-day use. Other things I like about the new iPad Air is the better cameras. So I was already really impressed with the cameras in the iPad Air 3rd generation, and this one just makes it so much better. I think that the cameras are good for both video conferencing, both on the front and rear cameras. The rear camera is a lot better than the front FaceTime HD camera, but I think that's one of those things. Apple is clearly investing into the cameras on these, and that's a good thing, and it's nice to see. There are some other smaller twists. So obviously not having the home button means that you don't have the same interface in terms of clicking to go back. It's all about flicking across, flicking your finger up and down, which this relies on a little bit. So you can do it in the same way, but it's not the same. It's quite nice being able to press a button to go back sometimes. It's just a more instant response, and you can't sort of have the iPad misinterpret what you're doing, which occasionally happens on the 4th generation iPads. The stereo speakers on the iPad Air 4th generation are better for content consumption. It's a more immersive experience if you're holding the iPad in front of yourself like this, having sound coming out of both sides, actually having stereo speakers is very cool. They are about the same volume, I found. Which is interesting. So they don't get that much louder on the 4th generation, but the 3rd generation is obviously just pointing the music or whatever TV show or movie you're watching in one direction. So that's something you just need to bear in mind. If you don't like just having the volume come from one side of the iPad, you're going to want to move to the iPad Air 4th generation. So in conclusion, the iPad Air 4th generation is basically an iPad Pro 11-inch with a few features taken away. Those are specifically around the display. Some of the things have been, let's say, reduced down a little bit, but it represents fairly good value at £569, to be honest. The 3rd generation iPad Air is a very good buy if you can find it at discount, especially in 64GB form. It still is very fast. The processor is more than quick enough to keep up with newer apps. It's still getting software support, etc. And it does have Apple Pencil 1 support, though Apple Pencil 2 on the newer iPad Air 4th generation is much better. The screen is still very good at 10.5 inches. You don't have those rounded corners, and I do think it is sort of easier to hold, and there are more accessories available for the Lightning ports at the moment, but that will change as we sort of see more and more iPads, such as the iPad Pros, with the USB-C connector. They are both very good tablets, and if I had to go into shop and buy one today, I would probably still buy the 3rd generation, even though the stereo sound is much better, and that's probably the main thing. I do consume media more on this than I create. For me, it's just the rounded corners. It's a nicer iPad to hold. I actually enjoy the experience of using it a little bit more as a result. But in terms of pure technical ability, there's no doubt that the newer iPad Air 4th generation does have a few more bells and whistles that the older one doesn't. And it is quite nice to be able to use a lot of those iPad Pro like cases and things, because it's harder to find accessories for this in terms of like a case and so on, which you can find for the iPad 4th generation because of the iPad Pro 11-inch lineup. Overall, they're both a very good choice. It's a bit of a non-committal conclusion, I know, but the fact of the matter is that these iPads have got so good, whether you choose the new iPad Pros, the standard iPad, the new iPad Airs, they all work very well with apps. They all are very good at content creation. They all actually do the same thing. It is just about the look, the feel, and whether you want that little bit of extra horsepower or not. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions, pop them in the comment section below. If you have any other thoughts about it, it'd be great to hear what you think. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye.